Our fifth panel of today is entitled Future-Proofing the Workplace and Shaping the New and Better Normal with People at its core. We're joined by three extraordinary people, diversity, inclusion and culture leaders who I'm thrilled to welcome to the DAL Global virtual stage. Susie Welsh, Group Chief People Officer and Advisory Board Member at DAL Global for Odeon Cinemas Group. LaFawn Davis, Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at Indeed.com, and Anne Pickering, former CHRO and Chief of Staff for O2 Telefonica UK. Our executive leaders are going to be explaining how they're preparing for the future, however uncertain that may be, and tell us all about their perception and challenges ahead in our new world of work. But before we get into the meat of this session, we would love to hear some personal introductions into your backgrounds, both personal and professional, and any insights into why you're all so very passionate indeed about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. LaFawn, I'm going to come to you first.
Sure. Thank you so much, Layla. So I am LaFawn Davis, Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Indeed. I've been doing this work for about 15 years, mostly in the tech sector. So I've worked for Google, Yahoo, PayPal, Twilio, and now Indeed. And I became very passionate about this work for a very simple reason. I looked around and didn't see a lot of people that looked like me, and was wondering why that was, especially in tech, a really booming industry, a new industry, especially out here in Silicon Valley. And so that's really how this passion started, is trying to understand what's stopping people from entering the space that I was in. I felt extremely lucky and privileged to be there, and I wanted to make sure that more people could experience the same.
Thanks so much, LaFawn. Susie.
So I'm Susie. I work for Odeon as their Chief People Officer, have always worked in kind of hospitality and leisure, and love that kind of guest interaction. And for me, I suppose diversity and inclusion has come from two places. It has come from being a mum and how my children grow up, and particularly my little girl, and wanting her to have as many opportunities as she possibly can. And then also just ensuring that the guests that we've been serving, actually the people that make all of those decisions, are reflective in all ways of the people that we serve along the way. So for me, it's kind of been the dynamic of those two things that have made me kind of really passionate about this area. Thanks
so much, Susie. And Anne.
Hi there. I guess I'm Anne Pickering, and until very recently I was the HR Director and Chief of Staff at O2, which is one of the major telecommunications company here in the UK. And there was a moment in time when I was the only female on that leadership team. And it was a very lonely place, even though my colleagues were, to a person, delightful. I left O2 a couple of weeks ago, and I'm delighted to say that of a 9-person board, there were 5 females. And the most important thing about that was not their gender, but it's just about the quality of the thinking by having such a diverse team. So, and the other point I would say is, yes, it's the right thing to do to have a diverse and inclusive workforce, but everybody knows that commercially it makes great sense. Twice as likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 6 times more likely to be innovative if you've got a diverse board. So it makes commercial sense as well. I think that's a really important point.
Absolutely.
It's also great to see, Anne, that you promoted internally your successor, another woman that was moved into your role.
Absolutely, it wasn't going to be any different way, Campbell, as you would know. No way.
Absolutely, well done, you. Well done.
Absolutely, and Campbell, I just must say, I love that you've changed your shirt, especially for the HR panel, which I'm guessing, as an HR leader yourself,
Pretty in pink.
Especially
have to be confident in pink. Have to be confident in pink.
Absolutely. And as we dive headfirst into the discussion for this session, I wonder, firstly, when looking at people's strategies through the COVID-19 lens, should diversity and inclusion be at the heart of successful people strategies? And additionally, what has the pandemic impact actually been from our observations? LaFawn, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
Sure, totally okay. So the pandemic has changed everything, right? It's changed the way that we work. It has changed some of the industries that are here that may not be here after we shake out of this. And it is a health crisis, but it's also a financial crisis. It's an economic crisis that is global. And so oftentimes what we find is that companies want to focus on just the operational issues, which makes sense. You need to stay afloat. You need to make sure that you're fiscally responsible. And you often have shareholders that you have to report up to. And so sometimes the foundational things like diversity and inclusion are kind of put to the side to focus on later. But honestly, if you're not focusing on it when you're slower, when there's more time to spend, you're not going to focus on it when you're fast and you're super innovative and you're changing. And so I'm imploring companies to actually, this is the time to spend on diversity and inclusion. This is the time to actually unravel all of your processes that have been put into place and see if you have introduced bias that's actually stopping people from coming into the company or barriers to entry into your company. Now is the time to look at all the programmatic things that you can do, not only to hire people when you get ready to do that, but also to make sure that you are retaining people, that they want to stay at your company because you have an inclusive and belonging, inclusive environment where people feel like they belong. And also that you're making sure that you are growing your workforce and you're particularly focused on people that are underrepresented or already marginalized in your community. And so it's changed in a lot of ways because there are a lot of people out of work. I know in the UK alone, more than 8 million people have been furloughed. Around the world, many more millions of people are out of work. I know in the US where I am, I think more than 40 million people have filed for unemployment, right? And so the biggest impact of the virus, of this pandemic is on people's jobs and the way that they work. So I am very, very fortunate to work at Indeed. I'm able to work from home, and so are many thousands of employees. But everyone wasn't as fortunate, right? People have either lost their jobs or they are in essential services. And I think we're starting to realize that some of the lowest paid employees in the world are the most essential to the way that we live our lives. So what I'm hoping is that things shift and change, and there's even more of a focus on diversity and inclusion, because the folks that are in essential services are often the ones that are underrepresented. They are often the ones that are in marginalized communities, and there's a socioeconomic impact as well. So this is a time where we actually do focus on it so that we can make it easier for people to work.
Many thanks for sharing, LaFawn. And I see, as have many of the organisations, put some really valuable, useful advice there on their websites to help and give guidance and support to those who are potentially furloughed or who, have lost their jobs very sadly. And Susie, any thoughts?
So I think it's almost going kind of two ways at the moment. So for some, I think it's easy to push it to one side and say it's not the most important thing on our list. We've got a business to save, a business to build, or whatever it may be. I think to LaFawn's point, this is the point where actually you should be stepping into it further. And in some ways, actually, there's been an opportunity to kind of propel things. So some of the arguments about the fact that people have been forced into remote working, if they're in office situations, has potentially helped people who might have struggled in other scenarios, or and brought them to the forefront because it's easier to balance whatever working life they may need to. So it's thrown up different dynamics, but there's also arguments to say as we start to reshape things, that may fall back by the wayside. I think for us, that kind of balancer of office versus all of the site level team members that we have across, it's really important to ensure that we build and continue to build equality and kind of share a voice and keep people together and belonging. So it is starting to shape what we do and how we have the opportunity to potentially build diversity and inclusion into the day-to-day and business as usual, and stop it just being something you do on the side or a program you run, and actually really enforce it and glue it into how you operate. If ever there was a time to do that, it feels like now is the opportunity to turn the dial.
Absolutely, and I know from knowing you personally that you've done some really innovative things at Odeon, which is fantastic, which I'm sure we'll get into later on in the conversation. Anne?
I think we're no great surprise. Here's my thinking. I think work is no longer a place where to which it's going to be a thing that you do, and quite possibly wherever and whenever you want. That's a massive cultural shift, but that's what's happened over the last 14 or so weeks. I think employees are living that new normal at home now, living and breathing it, and therefore, as employers, I think we need to keep up. Tech is important, clearly, but I think most organisations have proved that they've got the tech, but it's only as powerful as your culture, and that's going to be the differentiator. So shadow over leader is going to be really important, and getting your board on board is going to be really important. And for me, I think this is going to we're going to require new leadership behaviours. What you required 14 weeks ago is not what you're going to need going forward. I think going forward, we're going to need strong trust and empathetic and compassionate leadership, not command and control. I think we all need to think about talent, because I think good talent will start moving around next year, 2021. Remote working, I think, has unlocked untapped pools of talent, which could be an opportunity for many of us on this call. And possibly we need to think about pandemic secure industries. Some people who don't like change will be very drawn to that. So I think as HR leaders, we are going to be thrust into centre stage, because these are the sorts of things we need to start thinking about.
Absolutely, it's some very, very valuable insights there from all of you, and I think whilst we don't have a crystal ball, I think a lot of us wish that we do, mind you. Those are some pretty likely scenarios. Now,
sorry, Anne, picking up on that point, how do we prepare for that though? Because I mean, you spoke about leaders that were command and control, and then all of a sudden you want them to be empathetic leaders. I mean, that's just not something that you can just make that change overnight. How do we deal with that?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, what I've always done, and in when I've been working with boards, is spend a significant amount of time looking at board effectiveness, not just individual performance. As a board, what is it that we need to do to be effective? That has never been more critical, because to your point, Campbell, a lot of your boards might not understand that that they need to change the way they lead. So I think HR need to take leadership teams on that journey and explain just that, what's required going forward. And I've been speaking to a CEO of a major consultancy in the UK this morning, and he is scratching his head about how he does that, and it's all about taking them on that journey. They've got to think about how can you be visible and directional when you're not seeing your employees every day. So I think getting your people together in a virtual room and having those conversations and giving them the freedom to express their concerns, because a lot of them are going to be really anxious about this, is going to be absolutely critical. Journey that we have to start now.
Well, you've teed me up nicely for the next question, Anne, so thank you very much for that. So we can roll round now later. We can. LaFawn mentioned earlier about, unfortunately, some people have lost their job in this. A lot of people are been laid off. I mean, incredible numbers in the US. Up to 40 million. But those that are remaining at the place of work, employee engagement. How can we empower and engage the virtual teams with the current ways of working remotely? Because I mean, it looks as though that's here to stay for the foreseeable future. Susie, would you like a stab at that? Got to be kind of different in the cinema world.
Yeah, so I think hospitality and leisure is a sociable environment to work in. And similar to retail and other things, we've got a whole group of people that aren't at the end of a laptop that we need to engage and work alongside and keep within the culture of the business. And then we've got the group that sit on a laptop and can interact on Zoom and all of those things. And I think it's been interesting to see, to a degree, how quickly people have adapted and actually have kind of disproved in some way that you can only do certain things face to face and together, and in the same room, and actually you can have different ways of thinking. But also it's now challenging what you do when you start to bring people back together, and how you balance those two. They're very firmly, for me, two halves. They're not either one or the other. You've got to have both for us in the business that we work in. It's been hard, and you have to work really hard. That's what I've learned over the last 17 weeks. So you can't say things once, you can't do things once. You've got to come at it from different angles. We've done a lot around communication, a lot around open and asking opinions and building pieces up rather than downward communication. But it's also, I suppose, enabled me to think about what are the things that we really want to keep hold of and are really important for our culture moving forward, but actually what are also the things that we want to evolve and move forward and actually won't be the things we carry on into the future. And the leadership piece is the absolute key in all of that. It can't be done by a people team or an HR team. And if it's left with that team, then that's the wrong thing. As much as I love that, that's not right for the business. So it's how you find that balance in all of them.
Yeah. LaFawn, I mean, as if it's not already difficult enough in the tech sector in California, how are you dealing with this in Indeed?
Yeah, so at Indeed, you know, the nice thing is that our whole mission is we help people get jobs. So we're kind of front and center in this whole thing. And we've definitely seen an increase, a large increase in people looking for remote work, because of course we're all kind of sheltering in place. And so those are the kind of roles that we need to be able to do. I think that remote work is honestly the next diversity front. If you think about it, it allows a company to actually hire people from anywhere. It's not about someone who wants to move to headquarters or move to wherever you have offices and locations. People can work from anywhere. So that allows you to actually expand your employee base. Whereas some companies before thought certain roles couldn't be done from home, or they didn't want certain teams to be remote. They wanted to bring them together. And I think we're starting to really learn that it's not about where you are, it's about how you work. Right. And that's actually why inclusion and belonging are so important right now. And inclusion those are the actions that kind of bring us together. It makes you feel trusted and valued, where you can be authentic. But belonging is that sense of community. Right. It's the people and experiences that make us feel connected. And so if we can do this right in a remote environment, it actually shows that we can build better connections, potentially, even if we're not in the same offices. We're all on a sort of an equal playing field when we're working remote. No one's in a live location where other people are maybe in a remote location. We're all having the same type of experience virtually. And so it allows us to actually get to know each other a little bit better. I've seen kids pop up in videos. I've seen, dogs and cats running around. Sometimes parents show up walking in the background. You see interesting paintings and things in people's homes, and you get to know each other a lot better than you would if you were just sitting next to them or in a conference room with them. And so I think we're finding a shift in how people kind of come together with remote work. And because we're seeing the increase in remote work, my hope is that that's not just temporary, and that we're able to actually work this way successfully in the future.
No, thank you. I mean, you mentioned there about belonging. I think having the sense of belonging and community is going to be critical. If you're going to decide whether to stay with the organisation that you're with today, if you've got that real genuine sense of belonging and you felt as though your organisation, treated you well and looked after you well, during these difficult times, and that, that's the kind of place that I want to be at. So if you've got the good cause, you've got the career, and you've got the community. That sounds like a good place, you know, to be in an organisation. You know, Anne, I mean, what were you seeing at O2?
I have a phrase that I used to use a lot, which is I always wanted O2 to be seen as a hotel, not a prison. And what I mean by that is our employees choose to stay there because they want to, not because it pays the bills. And if you can engender that sort of culture, it really does help, and people will go the extra mile, and you get huge amounts of discretionary effort. And, you know, seeing the way the employees, 6,500 employees in O2 have pulled together to service our 34 million customers has been nothing short of amazing. So we had to shut all our stores. We decided not to furlough anybody, but those people who worked in stores were so grateful for that they were ringing our customers and helping them. So creating that sense of belonging is really essential. And the other thing I would say, I agree with everything that the speakers have said. Underpinning everything has got to be great communications and thinking about what platform you have to communicate with your people real time is so important. And you know, if you haven't got something that's pretty slick, now is the time to start thinking about that, because we were lucky enough to have something that worked, and it works really well. We would have struggled significantly if we had something that wasn't quite as slick. So communications and the platform that you use, I think, is going to be critical.
I concur entirely.
I'll not push you. Yeah, I was just going to say, I'll not push you on whether it was a 4-star or a 5-star hotel, Anne, you know, but we'll leave that till later. Sorry, Leila.
Well, I absolutely concur with what all three of our fabulous panelists have said there. Not only is belonging critical, but I think interestingly, when you look at the last 5 years to a decade even of what's actually happened with workforces and how our employees feel internally, you see a big seismic shift in mindset when it comes to these intergenerations and the different generations who are now in the workforce. You know, most of us know that millennials now make up you know, staggering proportion. I think it's actually the most of the workforce, generally speaking. And you know, millennials you know, often characterised by the fact that actually you know, if they don't feel that they belong in a certain environment, well, they're not going to stay. You know, there is a freedom of choice now, and everything is online anyway, so we can see, you know, Glassdoor, whatever it might be, whether organisations are a great place to work, whether they're not a great place to work. I think, you know, organisations who aren't thinking about, you know, a safe and responsible and caring environment for their employees absolutely will be behind the curve. And to the point of kind of shaping this new better normal, which I think, you know, frankly, the environment that we're living in, whilst it is challenging to a degree, plenty of positive benefits from that, in that, you know, there's almost a leveling of the digital playing field in terms of, you know, our talent and access to talent. But how can we balance flexible working alongside actually achieving goals? You know, all three of you, you know, are senior, you know, in your respective positions, have had you know, brilliant careers, you know, but I think there has historically always been this juxtaposition between kind of you know, work, achieving goals, also balancing that home life. And again, I don't say this is just for women, this is for women and men, and for anyone who are parents who are tuning in, but actually you know, that is something that has been historically a challenge. You know, and I guess how do enablers like technology, you know, in this current environment really kind of expedite that success? Anne?
We've always had a culture of flexible working in O2. It just always worked for us. So we were able to adapt quite quickly. And, you know, for me, it's all about trust. But if I go out to talk to the employees in O2 and talk to them about what they value most, they all said to me, flexible working. And it's because you trust me to do my job in a way that suits me. And I really value that. And what does that mean in practice? It means that I can drop my kids off in the morning and then I can start work at 9:30 as opposed to be in the office at 8 o'clock in front of my boss in my new suit. So for me, this is culture. You know, we've had a flexible way of working in O2. We've had 15 quarters of consecutive growth. There's not many organisations in the UK that can boast that. So for me, that's proof it works. You know, people like to, you know, work in a way that brings out the best in them. And if you can achieve that, whatever that might be for your workforce, then you're onto a winner. In O2, it happened to be flexibility, that was key. In other organizations, it might be something different. So really understanding what's important to your workforce is key. And the schoolgirl error I used to make many years ago is I assumed I knew what my workforce wanted. Surprisingly, if you ask them, they will tell you, and it can be quite different. So there is something about making sure, you're talking to your people to understand what works for them rather than what you think works for them.
Absolutely, because we all have different idiosyncratic details and different wants and desires. So it's a very, very good point there. And Susie, your thoughts?
So I think tech definitely, and that kind of the ability to work remotely, the last 12 weeks have kind of pushed us in that way. And it is really important. It has kind of showed us what we can do. I think there's an interesting balance of potentially the hours that people work. So it's very easy to get caught in the 9 to 5-ish. But I think this will also now start to shape the different hours people can work. And actually the fact that people may not want to work 5 days a week in the way they have done. They may choose to work slightly shorter hours because they've not had commutes. Or there's just so many different dynamics that I think are playing out at the moment. However, I do think it could be really easy to slip back if we don't continue the kind of empowerment and trust that has gone along with this. As soon as you put people back in an office, it will become very easy just to not continue with what we've done so far. So I think keeping that kind of conversation going will be hugely important to how we move forward. But it has to be a balance of everything. It's not just about tech. It's not just about the kind of conversations. It has to be kind of all of those elements, I think.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, to some of your points there, keeping conversations going and making sure that this is long term is absolutely critical. I know, Susie, you've done some, remarkable things at Odeon with kind of Facebook groups and looking at kind of social engagement in really innovative ways and podcasts and everything like this, which I think is just, excellent. LaFawn.
Yes. If we're talking about the last question, yes. I think some of what our research is showing us, specifically in the UK, is that flexible work is the number 2 biggest factor of what people look for in a job. Number 1 is salary, which makes sense, right? But number 2 is actually flexible work environment, and work-life balance and the culture and things like that seem to be a little bit more important for some of the younger generations, the Gen Z, millennial. I'm Gen X, which I think is the greatest generation, but we won't go there. And so I think we're finding different indicators are starting to shift, right, with the different generations. And so as we see that's why we're very research heavy at Indeed. And so we use the research to show companies how they need to potentially shift to attract more people. We're going to be working differently. And so as we come out of this pandemic and as we shift and change, I think we're going to see that the values that people hold in the types of jobs that they want are also going to shift and change, and companies need to shift and change with it.
Absolutely. And I wonder, you mentioned there's some stats from the UK. How are you seeing this, out of curiosity, in relation to some of the data and stats you've got over in the States?
So I think in the States, there's 40 million people that are out of work. So remote work is, I think, number 1 right now of what people are looking for. There's just not enough jobs that are remote at the time for the people that are out of work. So that's really what we're seeing. But still, flexible work environment is super important. There are a lot of things that people have, and we have this conversation all the time internally. It's not just the work that they're doing, but they also have a whole life that they have to balance. Some people are parents, and God bless them, they have young ones that they have to teach at home, or daycares are closed. We also have caregivers, people that are caring for people that are either elderly or potentially sick. We have people who are also isolated, who, maybe they're autoimmune deficient and they have to stay indoors, and that has a whole nother set of circumstances for them. Or maybe they're just learning how to, deal with what they have going on at home. And so they're really looking for roles at companies that are still hiring, right? Supermarkets, care homes, again, places that are essential because those are the ones that are hiring right now. I think, again, as we come out of this pandemic, that may change, right? When we're not sheltering in place, when it's not just about the essential work that has to be done. And then we're really going to see what are the things that are very important to people in this new world. And I think flexibility and remote work is still going to be number one.
Absolutely.
Very good. Very good. LaFawn, we heard Anne speaking there about some of the what she sees the future challenges, empathetic leaders, retaining and attracting, top talent. But how do you think we will keep IQ and EQ on the radar when shifting to the new normal?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to IQ and EQ, they have to be in balance. As I said before, super important that a company is operationally sound. That's important. Understanding your products, understanding your revenue, staying afloat right now is kind of bare minimum, but really making sure that on the IQ side that you are strategically going into the future. All makes sense, but it's your EQ that are going to keep your employees. So weaving empathy throughout is necessary in order to retain employees. And I'll give you an example. When we first started talking about COVID-19 with employees globally, I think it was in January, actually, of this year. We're a global company, so we have lots of countries, and it was starting to hit different countries at different times. Our first set of communications were around operations, right? We're going to close this office, follow the CDC and the World Health Organization, wash your hands, right? We're going to focus on these products. Here are the things we're going to do. All of the communications were around that, and I know employees really appreciated it. But at some point, employees raised their hands like, hey, could we actually also talk about how hard this is? Can we also talk about checking on each other and well-being and mental health? Can we talk about some of the things that are happening in society through this pandemic, like xenophobia, like racism, like socioeconomic disparity? Can we talk about those things too, along with all the operational things? Because these are the things that are affecting us as well, right? You're bringing, I don't believe in bringing your whole self to work, but I do believe in bringing your best self to work. And in order to do that, we have to talk about employees holistically. They're people, right? And so I think there has to be a really core balance of the IQ and operations and the EQ with empathy.
Good balance. Very good. No, very nice. Nicely put. Anne?
I can only echo what's been said there. I think, do you know what? If everybody started a conversation with their team with the words, how are you? I think that would frame the conversation really nicely, to pick up LaFawn's point. I think we are facing into a huge mental health challenge for people who are really struggling with with what they're faced with. So I think that sort of the blurring between work and home life is getting, it's what's the word? It's much harder now for people to separate out, and nobody drives home or gets the train home and has that time to sort of, download mentally. So I think, the EQ, looking at mental health and checking in with our people and saying, how are you? I think would be a really great way to start all your conversations. So it sounds a bit trite, but I think it's really important.
No, it's absolutely true. It is. It's becoming far more blurred, that line, I think, isn't it? It's kind of work, home, homework. The two really do start to almost become one. Susie, any thoughts?
So I think it's just one of the things is to how do you keep your leaders confident with what they're doing? So it's actually quite hard if you're not used to this, or you're working in an organization where actually not being in an emotional state in some way, shape or form isn't your kind of normal piece. I think you have to support your leaders quite heavily in terms of sharing that it's okay and doing specific elements with them. Not everybody's great at this. People tend to lean one way or the other. You don't tend to find balanced IQ, EQ leaders very often. And therefore you have to kind of help people through.
Sorry, Susie. I totally agree with you. I was just going to say, plus 1,000 on that, we often forget everyone is not good at this, and don't often think of it either, right? And so I think what we're finding is that those leaders that are not used to this are hesitant, and it could have an adverse effect on them and on their teams, because we're just expecting something of them that maybe they haven't necessarily done before, at least not at this length.
Yeah.
And I think something that Anne said actually resonated is one thing that a leader can do, especially if they're not used to this, and it's simply to ask, how are you? And it's not to, when people go, oh, fine, right? You say, nope, let's start again. Let's start again. How are you really? Right? And just that one thing, even if you don't know what else to do, if you start there and show your employees that you actually care how they're doing, that goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree, and I think it is, I mean, the future, absolutely. I hope, and I think we are seeing during this time, is actually the future of leadership is about, really kind of pushing the boundaries on emotions, emotional leadership, leading from the heart, some might say, which I know perhaps sounds a little trite, but, massively is true. I heard someone say something very interesting the other day, which was, business of the now is about intelligence, but future of the leadership of the future will be very much about the heart and about caring. So we think, this digitally connected world, so many things, can now be replicated. Artificial intelligence actually, does many jobs, but what it can't do is actually deliver that real, personal, caring, emotive response with authenticity. But very quickly, because I'm having notes from our lovely team behind stage saying we've got lots and lots of audience questions. We don't actually have time to ask all of them, so apologies for that in advance. We are, though, going to give the opportunity in our live chat, which is inside the summit, and our speakers will be available to answer questions there as well. But a last quick question before we head into some of the questions from the floor. And Susie, I'm going to come to you with this one. It is actually segueing very nicely from what we were talking about. It's the subject of returning to the workplace and hopefully this exit out of COVID-19. How can we look at the employer's duty of care, and does health and safety play a bigger role now than before in terms of how we do look after our people?
So I think the simple answer is yes, it does. It will, in all kind of manners. I think there's a balance again. So getting that health and safety right. People want to feel safe now more than ever. So that is coming through in so many surveys I've read, and internally as well. People want the safety and are looking to employers, I think, to help them understand what that looks like. So there's so much information, so many things to navigate. Actually, I think for employers, our role is to help shape some of that, which is a big responsibility for people. But there's balance to it. So health and safety is one piece, but putting that kind of lens of care and keeping that emotional piece there, it doesn't all stop when people walk back into the workplace. Everything we've done while people have been at home and have been in these really pressurized environments will continue even when they're kind of going back into some work normality. For us, that's into a cinema or whatever it may be. For others, it will be slightly different, but we have to kind of keep that going. So at the moment, we're working through how do you get the safety element in there, and then how do you ensure that it's kind of wrapped in our culture and our care for each other, to ensure that people feel safe and supported and confident. And confidence for me is the key bit, really confident to come back in and feel like they can play the part they want to play in the world.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And a question here from E. King. Given engagement continues to be remote, it would be interesting to hear the panelists' thoughts on how teams are working not to over-communicate and therefore ensure Zoom fatigue or Teams fatigue doesn't overwhelm your organisations. LaFawn, I'm going to come to you here because I can see you nodding in agreement.
Yes, we have conversations about Zoom fatigue all the time. I think when we first started going work from home, what was nice is that, we've been work from home since the beginning of March. And I think in the beginning, people were excited. There's no commute. right? Although we didn't all have home offices or a place, you know, some folks are balancing their laptop on a box and a stool. Others are kind of in the corner in the closet trying to have meetings. But I think we were all kind of energized by not having to commute. We weren't traveling. And so Zoom calls all the time. We were all video conference all day. And then the fatigue set in. And I think we're starting to understand that it's not just meeting that is actually exhausting people. My schedule has always been back to back, but there is something that happens psychologically when you are on video all day. And so I think what we're finding is that sometimes things don't need to be a meeting. Can this be an email? Or we're starting to, okay, well, let's do this as a phone call. So you don't actually have to have your video on. And it actually is less draining energetically to not have to focus on your face and someone else's face at the same time. Employees are still very anxious, right, about having to go back into the office. We've done all the surveys. We've tried to figure out how people feel. And they don't necessarily want to go back into the office until it is safe. They want to make sure that they feel safe. But it's balancing out the need to meet all the time because we're not in an office. You're not going to see your colleagues unless you do. So I think we have Zoom meetings, but we also have a lot of Slack channels and try to have some communication that way. Of course, there's always email, but there's also documentation. Something that I'm saying at Indeed a lot is documentation is inclusion. It shouldn't be about who you know or who to ask or trying to figure it out. It should just be there. You should have the information you need to do your job. And so I think what we're doing now is just starting to figure out all the other ways to communicate besides just meeting over video.
Campbell, I think you have one last question.
So one last question. I'll put it to Anne. Get 1 minute, Anne, so you're on the clock. Anne, do you think there's could be different approaches for the return to work, particularly for young people?
Yes, I think we've proven, many organisations across the world have proven that they can, you know, run very well without having people, you know, packed into an office. And a lot of organisations, as you know, are starting to plan how they get people back. I think what we need to do is keep it simple, give people choice. I think if people have choice, they feel in control. I think feeling in control is really important to people. Do it fairly. I think every employee wants to be treated fairly and in the same way.
Fairly, yeah.
So choice,
Very
fairness,
good.
clarity and consistency would be my watchwords.
Thank
Communications.
you so
We'll add all the C's. Very good. Thank you very much. Leila, wrap up time, please.
Thank you very much indeed for our fantastic panelists, and I wish we had much more time to speak, because actually both Campbell and I can sense that we could talk about this literally all day. But we are pushed on time because obviously we are live. So I'll say thank you very much indeed for all of you for joining us. You know, it's been an excellent discussion.